Hytale is coming out on January 13, 2006, so it's about time I go over their system requirements. Hi, I'm the Rampaging Rabbit, and welcome to my channel. So here are the minimum system requirements. Now, by this, they're assuming you want to play at 1080p and at 30 FPS. So right now, the operating system you should have is Windows 10 or Windows 11. Now, they are working on support for Mac and Linux, but that will come later on. So for the CPU, you should have an Intel Core i5-7500 or equivalent, or an AMD Ryzen 3 1200 or equivalents. Now RAM single player actually requires more than multiplayer, and I'll explain afterwards, right? So for single player RAM with a dedicated graphics card, you only need 8GB of RAM, and for single player with an integrated graphics card, you need 12GB of RAM. While in multiplayer, I'm guessing both cases, you only need 8GB of RAM. Now for the GPU, the minimum integrated GPU you need is the Intel UHD Graphics 620 and the AMD Radeon Vega 6. And for dedicated GPU, this is same across the minimum and the recommended GPU specs, but what they want is a NVIDIA GTX 900 series or an AMD Radeon 400 series or the Intel Arc A series. Now, just as a reminder, these series were, I guess you could say, released in 2017-ish, so if you have a graphics card past that time, you should be good to go. I believe it's the same with the CPU. Let me just quickly check on the side. I don't want to say some misinformation. Ooh. Okay, yeah, I got it a little mixed up. The CPUs were released in 2017, while the GPUs you could find in 2015, 14, and 16, right? So just make sure to check, go into Task Manager and see what type of GPU you have. Now for the storage, they do recommend you have a SATA SSD with at least 20GB of free space, and for networking, they would request you have 2 megabits per second connection speed for multiplayer. Now what they do want is your GPU drivers to be up to date and support at least OpenGL 4.1, and future updates may require it to support Vulkan 1.3 and DirectX 12. Right, that covers all of their minimum recommended requirements, and over here they give you a benchmark where they're getting 30 to 34 FPS at 1080p with an HD graphics 360, right? Yeah, and the render distance was 189, but they do want to say that no other program should be open in the background to guarantee performance, because we all know a single Chrome tab eats about 20 trillion gigabytes of RAM, okay? Now time for the recommended requirements. Now this assumes you want to play at 1080p at 60 FPS, so obviously it should be Windows 10 or 11. For the CPUs, it should be an Intel Core i5-10400 or equivalents, or an AMD Ryzen 5 3600 or equivalents. Now I am saying all equivalents, but if you have a better CPU, well then it also works. Same for above. And for the RAM, they recommend 16GB. For the GPU integrated graphics cards, which they recommend to play at 1080p and 60 FPS, you should have the Intel Iris Xe or the AMD Radeon 660M or better graphics card, equivalent or better. And dedicated is the exact same, so I won't bother going over it. Same information over here. Now they do recommend, the recommendation for storage is a little different. For their recommended storage, they would like an NVMe SSD with at least 20GB of free space and network speeds at 8 megabits per second. Yep, for multiplayer. Now storage requirements. So they say that the initial install size is 8GB, which honestly I'm surprised by. That's pretty small. Okay, that's small in comparison to other games because most games are now reaching like 20, 30, 40, 100, 200 gigabytes. Anyways, the saved game file size is 27 kilobytes per a 32x32 chunk. That's approximately 27 kilobytes and about 661 megabytes for 5,000 by 5,000 blocks. Right, so they recommend at least 10 gigabytes of available storage on top of the 20 gigabytes to have a safe and enjoyable gaming experience, and they strongly recommend an SSD. Well darn, I guess an HDD won't work anymore. Now it's time for the network requirements. So obviously single player does not need any network, you can play in offline mode, but this is for multiplayer. Now here it generally depends on your render distance, how much data you will download. Your upload distance is basically almost irrelevant. Right, they do have some information here if you want to read about it, and they tested this by going in exploration mode and moving at 1.5 times the speed to keep loading world data faster than a player could, right? So basically they were stress testing it to see. And so with a render distance of 192 blocks, they noticed that the minimum is 2 megabits and the recommended is 4 megabits. If you want to render at 184 blocks, the minimum you need is 4.5 and the recommended is 7. Now if you want to render at 480 blocks, the minimum you need is 6 megabits and the recommended is 10 megabits per second. Now they're also saying it also depends on the type of mode you're playing in. You can adjust the render settings and maybe make it lower. And if you're playing mini games such as Sky Wars or Bed Wars, which basically is like an island or a few islands and everything else is just blank, it might require even less data to play functionally. Now this is what they recommend for the recording and streamer requirements, or recording and streamer setups, to stream or record at 144p at 60 fps, 144 pixels, 60 fps. Now what they're assuming is that you're not after raw fps, but after consistent frame rates under heavy load, right? So obviously Windows 10 and 11. Now what they are recommending you have is an Intel Core i7 7700K or an AMD Ryzen 7 3800X or equivalents, or better. I'm just gonna add it on top. Now the RAM requirements are 32 gigabytes, and let's pray you guys have that much RAM, otherwise it's gonna cost a pretty penny. And for the GPU, they're recommending the 30 series, RTX 30 series, I should specify, the AMD Radeon RX 700 series, the Intel Arc A. Now obviously if you have a GPU better than this, well, it's all good. And another thing they're saying is that the recommendations are made as newer graphics card provide better video quality for the given bitrate, for a given bitrate and live stream scenarios, and they strongly recommend using AV1 or HVEG for video recording, that's for encoding. And for the storage, they recommend you have at least 10% of the NVMe SSD being free space, or at least 50 gigabytes of free space in it. And for best performance, they recommend using a separate drive for video recording. Oh, okay, I did not mean to do that. Anyways, their benchmark over here is absolutely insane, okay? First of all, 24 GB DDR5, they're using an NVIDIA 5080, which is almost top of the line, and AMD, I'm not even gonna bother. Anyways, 400 FPS at basically above UHD resolution, and they were rendering 780 blocks. So basically, you're cracked if you have one of these systems, and these ones should operate pretty nicely. Now they're saying how Hytale uses your hardware. So if you're playing in single player, Hytale runs kind of like a server on your laptop. Basically, it's rendering the full game client, which is rendering the screen, the UI, the gameplay, while it's also simulating the entire world, like the NPCs, the world generation updates, and the networking that goes on behind the scenes. So that means since your laptop is acting as the server, it's going to use more CPU and RAM compared to multiplayer. So that means it is more dependent on CPU generation, okay, due to NPCs and voxel logic running on your computer. I'm not going to pretend like I know what that is. I probably will in like 2 or 3 years, but anyways, yeah. For multiplayer, your system, as long as you're not hosting the server, your laptop basically runs as a client. So it just handles the graphics and gameplay, whereas the server handles everything else. So this gives you better performance on the same hardware. So now that means that you could potentially play Hytale with hardware which struggles in single player, in multiplayer mode, or just join a friend's world. Right now, obviously mods, those are going to be community made and will vastly impact the CPU, GPU, and RAM usage by the game compared to the baseline. Now for the viewing distance, what they say is that every time you double the viewing distance, you quadruple the amount of world around you. That means you have 4 times the blocks and PCs, and it means your computer has to work a lot harder. So what they're saying is, I remember this correctly, but they recommend you have a viewing distance of 384 blocks. Right, so they also designed the worlds around it. And let's quickly go over it. So this is what the world looks like at 192 blocks of render distance. This is their recommended 384 view of, oh my god, this is the recommended 384 view render distance. Now this over here is the first person view of 192 blocks, right? You can visually see the differences here. This is the recommended view of 384 blocks. Also, you can see the volumetric fog slowly like hiding away the buildings which are out of the render distance. This is 786 blocks of render distance, which I'd say is actually looking pretty darn good. And if you go down further, we go to 1024 blocks, and you can basically see the whole generation. Overall, the game looks pretty good. I am going to say that. I am actually really excited for it. I remember seeing Hytale back when I was like a small little kid. It's like, wow. Okay, anyways, yeah, here are their technical notes, and what they say is basically once your GPU meets their minimum requirements, you should focus on the CPU and RAM, upgrade it further, and it'll do better. Yeah, but they do have a texture atlas which is preloaded into the VRAM. So if your GPU does not have the minimum VRAM, it may stutter or you may run into issues. Now they did not list the minimum VRAM here, but based on what they said about the minimum graphics card being the 900 series and the what was it, Ryzen, or was it the Radeon 9? Am I imagining things? Now, the Radeon 400 series, they shipped with a minimum of 2 gigabytes of VRAM or more, so I'd assume the minimum VRAM they want is 2 gigabytes, and obviously they prefer a dedicated graphics card over an integrated graphics card, especially on the laptops, and I mean, they didn't say especially, but I'm just adding things on top. And then they say after that, focus on multi-core CPUs and enough RAM rather than top-end GPU. So this is basically the rule of thumb. Make sure GPU meets the minimum. Make sure you have a dedicated one on your laptop. Well, that's what they prefer. And then after that, focus on your CPU and RAM. Now, can you upgrade your laptop motherboard CPU? I don't know, and I haven't tried. And anyways, what they're saying is they're still doing optimization and working on improving it, and that's their goal, to continuously improve it. They're also working on making it backwards compatible for Mac, and that means basically it can run on the Intel processor ones and the M1 ones. They're working on Linux as well. They are looking into Steam and the Stream Deck one, so they are working on that. As once again, they're giving early access, which means there might be bugs. They'll take feedback and update their recommended and minimum graphics cards and streamer cards based on what they get. Right, and basically just a last one for them. Can't run single player very well, join a friend or play in a server. It'll show better performance. And yeah, that's basically all you need to know for Hytale's minimum system requirements. I keep on saying minimum system requirements, I'm generalizing it downwards, but basically these are the system requirements for Hytale. I hope you guys found this video helpful. If you did, a subscribe would be nice, and stay tuned for more Hytale content. So yeah, thank you for watching, bye!